Welcome back to this very special edition of the Taiwan Outlook. I'm your host and moderator, Wu Ruiguo. In this final segment, we will continue our discussions on looking ahead to what will happen in cross-strait relations and what are the opportunities and the challenges. We understand that strategic ambiguity has been very instrumental in terms of bringing the two sides back to the negotiation table last year, especially on official rhetoric and sensitive terms like 1992 consensus. Ms. Hsiao, we understand that now we're sort of getting into the next stage of cross-strait relations when we are discussing the WHA, military-to-military confidence building measures, and also diplomatic truce. These are more sensitive, by nature. Would you think that strategic ambiguity is enough? That is, 1992 consensus, one consensus subject to different interpretations. Would that be adequate as we proceed along more politically sensitive issues?
Well, despite the efforts of reconciliation of our government, there remains some very important conflicts of interest in the areas of sovereignty, security, and international space. Not that these issues cannot be discussed. However, serious differences do remain. And I think any rapid move on these areas to come to any settlement without the consensus, and I'm speaking from the perspective of the people of Taiwan, without adequate consensus, more public debate, and support by the public. I think moving too rapidly, moving too urgently on these important matters where important conflicts still remain would be detrimental to our society. And from the interests of maintaining cohesion, unity, and respecting the democratic process within Taiwan, I think to take things further, I would really urge the government to proceed cautiously and to increase their efforts at communicating with our public.
Okay. How about you, Dr. Schwab? Would you think that strategic ambiguity is still a sound policy for both Beijing and Taipei as we move into more politically sensitive areas?
Well, judging by history since 1992, it has worked extremely well.
Yes.
And I don't see any reason why you should abandon this ambiguity. Clarity, I don't think, would be very helpful in this situation. And we have to hope for the best so far as the future is concerned. But for the time being, I would certainly leave this alone.
Yes.
Continue with strategic ambiguity.
Good. And Professor Zagoria, we know that 1992 consensus was sort of like a foundation that brought the two sides back to the negotiation table last June in 2008. Would you think that's enough? One consensus with no interpretation or with different interpretations. Would you think that's adequate? I'm going to first address the question to Professor Zagoria and then later to Professor Wang.
Well, first of all, I agree with Ms. Hsiao that it's wise at this stage not to take on too ambitious goals and to proceed on the most sensitive issues. That's why I think it has been very sound for the leaders on both sides to proceed with the easier issues first, leaving aside the more difficult issues. That raises the whole question of the domestic imperatives on both sides. Hu Jintao has clearly a domestic issue, a very strong sense of Chinese nationalism, a very strong sense that there is one China and Taiwan is a part of it. And clearly in all his rhetoric, even when he agrees to the 1992 consensus and other more ambiguous formulas, he's obviously keeping in mind his domestic opposition. And similarly here, there is this is a society that is very deeply divided. So I'm in favor of ambiguity and
no need for clarity.
And I think that it's too early to take on the most difficult issues. Rather wait gradually build mutual trust, confidence, increase economic and cultural relations, rather than try to be too clear. Lawyers try to be clear,
yes,
but smart politicians, I think, prefer to take their time.
Okay. How about you, Professor Wang? Would you agree that 1992 consensus should be enough as a foundation as we proceed along these more politically sensitive issues?
Well, my point of view, I think it is quite enough to pursue even the longer political sensitive issues, because I think that that's a kind of compromise across the strait. And the compromise within the society. Even I know that the DPP and some Taiwanese people didn't agree that 1992 consensus exists or like that term, but I think it's better than one China principle or one China policy to them. So I think that 92 consensus is a kind of magic word. You don't mention the content of one China, but you leave the interpretation of what it means.
Yes.
And I think that for Beijing, I noticed that Hu Jintao and even recent Wen Jiabao also said publicly in their statement that the both sides has a good development of relations based on the 92 consensus. I think that's a kind of progress for Taiwan,
yes,
because even Beijing leader doesn't mention
keep referring to that.
Doesn't mention one
yes,
China so frequently, and they can use the 92 consensus as a word to describe the cross relation. So I think that they have also made some compromise for
these
their
issues. But also, we cannot deny the fact that in recent speeches by top Chinese leaders, including Chinese President Hu Jintao and Premier Wen Jiabao, they keep referring to the issue of one China principle. Then I have the question for both Deputy Minister Chao and also for Ambassador Lord. Would you think that there is room for the two sides to compromise on the very, very tough and very, very sensitive issue of one China principle? Ambassador?
First of all, you said, Mr. Moderator, and others have said, and I agree with all that's been said so far about going slowly, that there's no need for further clarity. I'd go even further than that. There's no possibility of further clarity. China will not give up the one China principle. Taiwan will not give up the question of sovereignty for Taiwan. And therefore, you have to be ambiguous. So I think there's probably a consensus here that we're going to have to keep dancing around the 92 consensus. And the beauty of it, nobody understands what we're talking about. And that's very good. Now, with respect to your question, of course, as Mr. Zagoria said, each side has to worry about its domestic audience. So it's not surprising that Hu Jintao does talk about the one China principle to his domestic audience and even internationally. And it's not surprising that President Mao talks about the sovereignty of Taiwan.
Yes.
But when they meet, or not the two of them, but when the two sides engage, that's when the confusion and ambiguity is invoked.
Yes.
So it's okay if each side plays its domestic audience, which it has to, but for the foreseeable future, there's going to have to be ambiguity.
Okay.
And on one final point, it's a clear consensus, I think, it seems to me, in Taiwan, leaving aside the specific issue of sovereignty, that the question of Taiwan getting closer to the mainland will not arise until China's political system becomes more open and pluralistic and democratic.
Yes.
That's one reason for Beijing to have political reforms, along with economic growth, political and social stability and standing in the world.
That will come in.
And that is the crucial long-term issue for the contours of this relationship.
Deputy Minister Zhao?
For too long, I think the two sides are the only policy for the two sides was to fight. I think it was us who would suffer more because we are the smaller side of the in the picture. We need to find a parallel interests with China in order to put aside differences so that we can concentrate our efforts on building our economy and improve our social welfare and so on. So this 92 consensus is a very good thing. I think it allows us room so that we can not only create peace in the area, but also I think domestically either side, the green and the blue, they all agree with the.
They can also accept
nation of Republic of China. So I think this is safe there.
Finally, two questions. One for Ms. Chao. Is there room for inter-party reconciliation on the important policy in cross-strait relations? And to George, on the issue, what are the recommendations that you will make as a friend of Taiwan in terms of dealing with Beijing on these very sensitive issues that we've discussed today? Michelle?
Well, I think reconciliation would have to come after the issues are laid out by both sides, and a public debate between the two political leaders would be helpful on this.
Yes.
And also, I think if policy is discussed within the institution of the Legislative Yuan, that would also be helpful to resolving some of the differences.
Dr. Schwab?
Yes, what I would recommend is for the political realists in the pan-blue camp and pan-green camp to have weekly meetings to thrash out what is in the interest of Taiwan.
Yes.
And it is much better to present to China a uniform, a united position rather than a fractious position.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, we certainly had a very productive policy direct dialogue between senior policy analysts from the United States and also government officials and scholars in Taiwan. In the future, the Taiwan Outlook will continue to identify important policy issues and invite well-informed guests to keep our viewers informed about the latest developments in and around Taiwan. I want to thank you again for watching. I want to thank our guests for being here. Some of them had to travel long ways away to get here. And I wanted to see you next time on Taiwan Outlook. Thank you very much.